The idea behind this discussion, as I was discussing with my co-panelists a little earlier as well, is to try and bring out the mood. What is it that you should be thinking of when we try and talk about some of the more technical intricacies of either delivering or administering a tax environment or being at the receiving end of a tax environment in this country? So that's the broad question that we are trying to address, but we're trying to address it in two or three, in two actually levels. One is obviously domestic, and the second is global, because the both do intersect, and the intersection is the point at which many of our lives are affected, and increasingly so today. So the first question is really, why should we be talking about it? I think we should be talking about it because we as a country are growing and we want to get somewhere. In order to get somewhere, your life has to become simpler as a business, as an enterprise, as a corporation, or even as an individual. And if it's not simpler, then obviously you're not encouraged, you're not confident enough to take the big bets and the risks that you should be taking in order for you to grow and for therefore the economy to grow. So therefore, are we in that right direction, at least as a tax administration in delivery or administration, to achieve that? So that's really the one big question. The second is, even as we try and define what the landscape is today, how are we looking ahead? How are we looking ahead at, let's say, the next couple of years? And are we feeling confident? Are we feeling despondent? And really, that's a question and questions that I will put to my co-panelists. So we also have some audience questions here. So let's start off by asking first, what do you think about and let's have the first question, please. What do you think about the tax regime today? Is the regulatory regime, is it tougher than before or no? Very simple, straight question, yes or no? I think you have a polling meter. Yeah, it's very simple, yes or no. Yeah, maybe is not accepted. I know you'd like to say that, but it depends on who you ask. Okay, so 45 people, I mean, I won't go with percentages. So out of the 45, 54 people who have clicked, 45 have said that the regulatory regime is indeed tougher than before, right? Okay, so now let's dive into it, and let me get first a quick local domestic perspective, and then let me get Tim in. So, Suhail, why don't you start off?
Okay. So,
do you echo what you saw there?
Well, yes, I echo what I saw there, and we can't deny what we saw there as well. And this is a story that really needs to be fixed, because when you talk about ease of doing business, if the view is that 83% of the people polled today think that it's tougher, and we know as practitioners it's becoming tougher and tougher, it is a reality. And honestly, you know, the growth story of India is getting delayed. You can't deny the growth story, but certainly the growth story is getting delayed because of this kind of sentiment, as well as in many ways a reality.
A tough regulatory environment like GST, for instance, also means increased business for you. But do you see that at some point converging negatively?
Well, you know, GST was supposed to help ease of doing business. It is a tax designed to do that, just that. But when you brought in 5 slabs, complex filing, uncertain regulation, yes, it can help tax advisors, but certainly, you know, there's only so far you can go on the misery of what clients are experiencing. Really, we want a tax system that works so that when businesses make money, all of us can benefit as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah, the audience poll reminded me of KBC, you know, what's the... Anyway,
there's no prize at the end of this, I can assure you.
I never expected 83% to say that, but I think that's my feeling as well as a lawyer. I think everything we do should be now geared. We should ask every step we take, is it going to take us towards a 5 trillion goal or not? That's a very ambitious, audacious goal, which all of us must pursue. Unfortunately, what I find is that when you talk of ease of doing a business, nobody talks of ease of starting a business. You want to take manufacturing from 17% to 25% of GDP, create 100 million jobs. All these are good in theory. But what does it take to start a business? That is actually part of the state list in the constitution, because all the regulatory permissions come within the state laws. That, I think, has not received enough attention. There are still far too many permissions required to start any business, any hotel, any construction, there are just too many permissions which can be eliminated. And to put it crudely, these permissions are just for rent seeking and for obvious reasons why they are there. That has to go. As far as ease of doing business, see, once the business starts, once you start doing business, then the major hurdle is your taxation. And I think we have to do something about the way the taxes are going. There's no point just having a reduction. One day you say, I'll tax the super rich. Next day you find it's a completely absurd thing that you've done. And then you go back and say, no, now it's become less. And the third day you make it 25%. I think today what we require is a long-term fiscal policy, which VP Singh had. You have a clear roadmap for the next 7 years. What are you going to do as far as taxation is concerned? And it's just not just tax. It's the indirect taxes, the GST, the customs duty, and so on and so forth. The other thing which I wanted to just mention briefly is that we must always remember that taxes should be the byproduct of growth. The higher taxes should come from more growth. You can't have a stagnant growth and keep on increasing tax. Then that just leads to tax terrorism, tax harassment. And what the director of Rafale said on tax terrorism is a very, very, very significant pointer. He had the guts to, or the thing to say it, that don't put us to tax terrorism, but what he thought is what is really in the minds of every second foreign investor. I know cases where in a particular sector, a foreign company has 1.9% of its global turnover from India, but 89% of the litigation is from India. And that's the thing coming again and again. So we'll have to sort out this tax terrorism or tax problem at the very earliest if you have to reach this 5 trillion economy. What I find is now that China is getting expensive, people are going to Vietnam, people are going to Malaysia. Why? Why aren't they choosing India? We should pause and think. And we should also get rid of this regulatory, fully controlled mindset. Let people, so you wanted startups, but you killed the startup by this ridiculous angel tax, So I think something's gone
So
seriously wrong.
I'm going to come to a solution then or not, but why does something like an angel tax exist?
Well, this is the irresistible urge to regulate everything, whether it's a school fees or anything has to be regulated. And you feel that everybody is making some money somewhere and let us tax that. You say, okay, fine, the angel tax, there'll be high valuations and therefore there's something going wrong. But that's all over the world. I mean, Amazon didn't make money for years. You would have killed Amazon long ago with your angel tax if it was in the US. So why have angel tax? I mean, if there are 100 startups, 3, 4 will be rogue. It's all right, but at least, and yes, yesterday's Economic Times, Ratan Tata says that many startups are going outside India. It's a very dangerous situation.
This is also linked to a complete breakdown of trust between the tax administration system and the government behind it and those it is governing. And that has increased, the distrust.
I don't know the breakdown. There was never any trust from practicing of 40 years.
Okay.
It's always been a very, very hostile regime. And you always feel that I got to tax this man as much as I can. And your system, like 270A in the income tax act. How do you justify just because there's a variation, it's deemed to be penalty? How do you justify these provisions? Excise, you say, up to 2 years, I'll straight away demand duty. I mean, why? Why are you so hostile to business? And let's not forget, we lawyers, all of us survive because of business. The more the entrepreneurship, the better for us. But you keep on attacking them aggressively.
Okay, let's get a global perspective from Tim. So, the things are changing. I mean, there is reverse globalization in some ways. Many countries are aligning on some issues when it comes to tax. For example, maybe taxing the social giants or the technology giants, and they're diverging on other factors. We're seeing a very mixed environment when it comes to large companies doing cross-border investments and then the resultant tax regime. So what's happening? Take us through how things look from your perspective.
Well, I think you're right, Govind. There's a mix, like so much in life. There's the one hand, and then there's the other hand. And Grace Perez-Navarro, Andrew Dawson have alluded to some of these things in the work that the OECD has been doing. You see the OECD, and you see a lot of countries lining up behind the efforts of the OECD. The number of countries participating is incredible. But at the same time, we have countries taking their own steps. And I mean, we talked in the preparation, we talked a little bit about the line between self-interest and selflessness, or selfishness and selflessness. And we, all of us individually, within our families, within our countries, have to draw that line every day. So you'll cooperate as a whole, globally. If it's in your interest, you'll be the good global citizen as a country. but there are limits to how far you will go. And the other thing to keep in mind always is that all policy is politics. So you can talk in the abstract about what are the best theoretical economic arguments, what are the best policies, but to quote Jean-Claude Juncker when he was talking in the context of the Greek credit crisis, we know exactly what to do. We just don't know how to get reelected if we do it. And one always has to keep that in mind. Again, Grace and Andrew have alluded to this without being quite as explicit about it, but trying to get that political buy-in, it can be challenging because what you're doing globally then has to be taken locally and sold locally to the electorate. And you have to withstand the potential criticisms, often overly simplistic, of your political opponents.
Right. So the increasing role of politics in tax, and I'll get Mr. Datar's view on this as well, was manifested in the example that you were quoting me earlier, that when a taxi driver asked you about the tax regime, and I also asked you, and I wondered, was he talking about personal tax? But he was actually talking about corporate tax.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm getting in a taxi in Helsinki and engage the cab driver because I find I like to engage taxi drivers to get a perspective on the local environment, the local politics. What is it that the person in the street, or in this case, the person in the taxi, is thinking about politics? You want to get some interesting discussions. Ask a guy in a black cab in London about Brexit. You don't know what you're going to get as a result of that. But in this conversation, I came out that I work for a global tax organization. Well, that didn't exactly enamor him to me, and he started quoting me. And this is a cab driver in Helsinki, but he's been reading the front pages of the newspapers in Helsinki, and he is aware and sensitive to global tax, to the perception, some right, some wrong, that multinationals are not paying their, quote, fair share. And the reality is that this taxi driver is not going to spend a whole lot of time sitting in a boardroom like this, in a meeting room like this, talking about rational economic arguments. He or she is going to have a much more superficial and simplistic understanding of these issues, but that person's vote counts just as much as yours and mine. And so that's the environment in which the politicians and the policymakers are working.
Politics playing a greater role in the way our tax regime is getting defined? People want maybe business to be harassed and shown its right place?
I don't think so. In fact, echoing what Tim says, Johan Perron of Argentina put it slightly crudely but very truly. He says the masses don't think, the masses feel. They get the sense of feeling of what's particularly happening. They don't think, I mean, for them it's a daily bread and butter issue. I don't know if the man on the street, as far as GST is concerned, it has certainly hit him. Demonetization hit him very badly. So, and the man on the streets is not happy. And I also like to talk to taxi drivers. The basic feel I get is they feel that uncertainty is there. And what's happening actually in India, I feel, is that you're getting more and more into a welfare economy without any source of wealth. You're like in Tamil Nadu, everything is free. Rice is free, fans are free, gas is free, everything is free.
Huh? Color televisions.
Color television is free, and so on. So, but where's the money coming from? And now because you can't govern, you give more freebies. Because you give more freebies, more and more money instead of going to investment is going into freebies. That again becomes a vicious circle.
I mean, maybe it's a simplistic question, but I'm only asking it, right? But does that tax regime that we finally are discussing now reflect in a way, the will of the voter?
I don't think so, because only 2 or 3% of the people pay income tax. So I don't think that reflects.
No, big business. Big business is bad, and therefore they should be taxed to the hilt.
See, partly also what I find is the other problem which really worries me is the constant negative press that I keep getting all the time, and that definitely affects the national mood and psyche. There's all the time you keep on harping on the bad side. There are a lot of good things happening which you don't highlight. But to answer your question, as far as the common man is concerned, he's more worried about the direct taxes. He's more worried about his job. He's more worried about his daily item of food. So he's not really bothered about the income tax or the MLI.
No, he's not bothered about it, but he's expressing a view that big business is skimming the profits, or I mean, which rightfully should go back to the exchequer. he's expressing a view that a lot of big businesses are thieves, and we've seen a bunch of headlines in recent months, for instance, which only validates that. And therefore, what's wrong if the tax regime is tough and assumes that you're guilty before being proved innocent?
Yeah, that's, again, see what happens is...
So this comes back to the question about politics playing a role in what we're experiencing.
Yes. You see, but the point is this: you have one case. Say, for example, you have one industrial group which has gone bust, and the directors are arrested and so on. The common man gets the impression everybody is good, but they don't forget that for this one industry, there are 10 industries which are doing very well and doing well. He does not know why the company has gone into this, and this constant, like for example, chartered accountant. You just go and arrest somebody, everybody gets an impression that this community is bad. That's not true. See, that's the unfortunate part of it. And again, we must seriously examine this ED arrest culture which is going on in India. It's going to be tremendously counterproductive in the long run. It's going to be far more disastrous for short-term benefits. It's good media optics, somebody's arrested, put him in jail for 60 days, but you are creating havoc down the line.
You're referring to Chidambaram's case?
Not Chidambaram, I'm referring to ED generally.
Okay.
No, I'm not referring to Chidambaram, yeah. No, even as far as now, since you mentioned a particular person, my personal view is, the Supreme Court has repeatedly said that jail is the exception and bail is the rule. Now, for the life of me, anticipatory bail, the two grounds of anticipatory, main ground is, will he tamper with the witnesses, will he abscond? If the answer is no, you don't put him in jail.
Okay.
So, this is the particular point. I'm just saying that the entire PMLA law is, you got a predicate offense, which is in the schedule. So, it's a simple like 420, simple FIR under 420, a charge sheet under 420, he becomes liable for money laundering. You have a case, you attach his assets, and you're telling me something about some 55,000 crores. I think you should highlight that.
So, just to take your point, Govind, yes, it is driven in politics the way I see it, because the government came on to into power on an anti-corruption platform, and that pendulum now has swung so far the other way that this belief that everybody is crooked or everybody is scamming the system. There was an article in India today a few issues ago, 16,000 cases under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. As Mr. Datar said, everything now attracts that act. That act, if you make a statement in front of the officers, admissible in evidence, whatever else draconian you could put in, you have put into that act. 16,000 cases, 18 convictions, 1-8. 55,000 crores of assets attached. That's direct attachment. What happens to the domino effect? So these companies owe money to banks, they owe money to other businesses, everybody's spooked. And in this kind of an environment, it is very difficult to do business. I dare say that many of the companies, and look, business failures are just par for the cycle of doing business, but if you presume that everybody who's failed a business is crooked about it, nobody will take risks. And I dare say many of the businesses who are attached or are in rigor mortis now, given a fair chance, would have come back. The businesses go through cycles. Okay, I missed a payment, my business failed, but that does not mean I'm crooked. And that is the environment, unfortunately, that we are now sort of created in India. And I think it's very difficult to create jobs and get investments in this kind of an environment. And honestly,
so let's talk about some of the steps the government has taken. So, and let me take something that's visible to everyone: e-assessment, right? Ostensibly aimed at removing a layer of interface and therefore potential corruption and also making it faster and so on. What's your sense?
Well, GST is the greatest example of technology and tax going hand in hand. It's really not succeeded. E-assessment is just rolled out, but there are two things. Please understand, and I was talking to a tax regulator in India about this. In Bombay, to reduce the sort of rent-seeking attitude of the people who give building permissions, you made all this automated. You file online, you'll get permissions in so many days. Nothing like that happens. And the interesting thing about this model is that the only person who is anonymous is the tax assessor, not the assessee. Eventually, you know who the assessee is. Now, how do you fix this problem? I think it's a little early to talk about it, but
is it
fundamental use of technology will help.
Your view? E-assessment not for e-assessment, but as a symptom of, are we trying to address the right problem? Are we doing it properly?
It is not going to help. It's just, I think I would not say a gimmick, but it's not going to help for the simple reason, as long as you got absurd revenue targets he has to meet, whether it's e-assessment or paper assessment or textbook assessment, he's just going to go make aggressive demands on you and leave it to you to go to appeal and pay 20% on appeal and so on. So the point is not the e-assessment, the point is don't set these absurd revenue targets. You know the law is, why do you reopen assessments? Why do you involve 263? What, I mean, if you're going to have an aggressive, abusive method of implementing a tax, whether it's E or F or J makes no difference.
Okay. So, I'm going to talk about the future, and before I do that, let me pose a slightly more maybe broad future question to you, Tim. Taxing the global digital giants is something that a lot of countries are thinking, moving, have implemented in some direction. Where should countries like India be in that curve, and who should they follow in your mind? Because that's a big chunk that we are looking at.
Well, and there again, the selfishness versus selflessness. So if the OECD is able to move forward as quickly and as ambitiously as they are hoping, and they're able to generate some global agreement on an approach, then I'm all for everybody following a similar approach. And we should keep in mind, I said similar with reason. It's never going to be exactly the same. The systems are not exactly the same today. You have differences in interpretations, you have differences in application, but the general approach is the same globally. And the more that we can do that globally, the better. But again, you've always got to take a look at where things are going globally. Are they going to be able to achieve what they're hoping to achieve? And I think, again, Grace and Andrew have been fairly candid here in saying this is their ambition, this is their hope, but there are no guarantees. So, could we very well end up a year, 2 years, 3 years from now with over 20, 30, 40 different approaches to this kind of taxation? It's a possibility.
We saw corporate tax rates being cut in India recently, and you've seen this happen in other countries. What does this achieve in the medium term, in the long term? I mean, the intention could vary, but what does it achieve?
Well, it really depends on the state of your tax system, the state of your economy. So we in Canada went through this process many, many years ago, like 20 years ago, where we were trying to broaden our base and reduce the rates. The idea is to try to achieve some of the golden objectives in tax policy, tax neutrality, try to impact or reduce the impact of tax on decisions to allocate resources and have that impact be minimized. And when you broaden your base, you can reduce your rates and at the same time maintain your revenues. In fact, you may be able to enhance your revenues if by making your system more neutral, you improve the economic efficiency in the allocation of resources. But if you've already gone through that process, then reducing your rates, it ends up reducing your revenues. I'm not a big fan of the Laffer curve. Yes, it works sort of well if you're sitting in a cafe in Washington and drawing on the back of a napkin, but in real life, life isn't that simple. So it depends on where you are at. The sense I have right now is that the steps that India is taking are appropriate steps because it is part of a broad basoning and then rate lowering process altogether. The big challenge, and it's a big challenge that we face in Canada, is living next door to the United States, where their approach to social spending, their approach to what government should be doing in terms of public health care, public education, public infrastructure is very different from ours. They also have a fiat currency that allows them to run deficits that if we in Canada ran those, we'd have a run on our Canadian dollar, and it would be back in the days of the 1990s when the Wall Street Journal was writing about the Canadian peso. So it depends on where you're at. But India, I think right now is at a good time to be able to do it and have it be part of a very positive set of changes.
Okay, let's talk about the future. What's the near future looking like? How should we be approaching it? Can we make life better for everyone? And I've got
Yes.
an audience question coming up as well.
Yeah, I would say that this recent thing of 25% was an excellent step. In fact, if you ask me frankly, if I had the power to do so, I would have a flat tax of 25% across the board for all corporate taxes. That you will, believe me, you will earn much, much more by having a flat tax of 25% and avoid the system of a corporate tax and a DDT and a MAT and so on. Just have 25% flat tax. You will earn much, much more money. And I think internationally, 25% seems to be like a magic number. You cross that, you become an unattractive country for investment. So 25% was a good step. I hope they make it across the board and cut off all the other taxes.
Okay, so you're saying we are simplifying and therefore that's
Yeah, this
more attractive
25%
for
was a very
future.
welcome
So
step,
what are the
yes.
other challenges and opportunities that you see in the context of a tax regime? And let me supplement that quickly. Do we need to be consciously decriminalizing some
Yeah, two
sections?
things on the tax. Apart from 25% COP, I would prefer that as a GST. You have a 0%, 5% and a 15% or 18%. Then don't say that a car, there's a sin tax and a car will get 53% and cement will get 28%. It's a fact.
Usually Mercedes and chappals.
Yes, yes. I mean, if you go to Singapore, whether you buy a Rolex or you buy a chappal, you pay the same 7% GST. And that's the basic point of GST. Everybody pays the same GST. So I'm looking forward as a wish list to have a 0%, 5% and a 15 or an 18% flat across everything else. That will really solve a large amount of problems. And my bigger worry is this arrest first and think later. You have put people in jail for 2G for 2 years. They all got acquitted. Now who's going to compensate them? The coal secretary, you arrested him, he got acquitted. So now this concept of arresting and then thing is very, very dangerous. It should not, I think that, why arrest him? You file a charge sheet or file the FIR. If it's a large amount, you tell him don't.
But how do you, get this moving? I think so. We all agree, or maybe more people.
You know, the very
saying-
shocking thing, one senior person in the government told me, I said, what arrest? He said, ये तो केस का बहुत टाइम लगता है, उसको जेल में डाल देंगे, बाद में क्या होता है देख लेंगे. This is not the attitude.
So how do you change that?
Don't arrest. Follow the Supreme Court judgment. Make it bail. For example, Chidambaram, why should he not be on bail? I may not like him personally at all, but he should not be in jail.
So you like him or don't like him?
No, I'm just giving an example. I'm saying forget personalities. The law is the law. Tomorrow, Govindraj, suppose you are found with 100 crores.
I wish.
I wish, yeah. Then, I mean, you'd prefer to be in jail with 100 crores. So. You give me 100 crores, I'll be in jail, no problem. So that apart, but on a serious note, in the criminal procedure code, in the law, you make it non-bailable, you make it this way, and so on and so forth, and then the presumption of guilt. If you see after the Vanshu committee, in India, every director gets up in the morning a potential criminal, and most of them are not bailable at all. Whether it's pollution, PML, everything is now non-bailable.
Okay, Suhail?
Well, it's
The future, how is it looking? What can we do to change this atmosphere of...
certainly you need to decriminalize. The government says that they're a government that is listening to industry. There is some movement to decriminalize stuff around the Companies Act, which, was the most absurd place to bring in criminalization unless there's a criminal activity. But under the Companies Act, for God's sake, people were arrested and all kinds of stuff going on. Now, the government seems to be listening. 2 days ago, I had a mail from FICCI or somebody saying that, look, please give us inputs on what needs to be decriminalized. But the fact is tax. Tax touches everything. Whether you're a partnership, you're a sole proprietor, whether you're a company, and I can't agree more with Mr. Datar that there needs to be decriminalization. The bail laws need to be followed the way it's set and the way it was intended.
And I don't think you should give power of arrest to the GST officers. You want to get a permission from magistrate, then arrest him on a very case. But just giving an income tax officer the power to arrest and making a statement given to him as admissible in evidence on the basis of which you can make the assessment and further convict him is absolutely unknown in a civilized world. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back for a quick 1 minute sum up from all of you, but there's another audience question, which is, how do you feel about the future? I mean, I asked them, but let me ask you. And can we have the question? Are things going to get better on the tax front, yes or no? Are things going to get better or not? Better than what it is today. Whichever way. Okay. So 39, 60% feel it's going to get better. And so this discussion has had a good effect. I think we started on a much more, on a much more.
The only thing is better for the common man or for the professional.
Okay. Okay, but 60-40, whichever way you interpret it. Okay, so let's get closing comments. Suhail, you want to start off with how's 60% of the folks here feel that things are going to get better, even if they're not good today, even if they're not feeling so optimistic right now.
Look, India is at a very interesting time in this whole global upheaval. We have a strong consuming population. We have an opportunity because of the global trade wars to really step in and boost up manufacturing. The solution to this is not more free trade agreements, which the government can do if they want to do and are doing, in fact, but you really need to make it easy to do business so that you can take advantage of the global opportunity. And I think, honestly, we are missing that boat as we speak right now.
Well, I think that it's going to get very much better. I think we got some kind of a 1991 repeat scenario where when things went right to the end and then you had this liberalization. So I'm looking for the same thing where we have now, the government realizes that if it keeps doing the same thing, it's going to get worse. So I think things will definitely improve, and hopefully the next Taxsutra in 2020, you'll have a much better sense of the mood, I think. Yeah.
And the $5 trillion target, I mean, how realistic do you think
if they continue this way, there's no way we're going to make it, but it is still attainable, if not in 2020, at least 2 years down the line.
Okay.
See, China was now 14 trillion, so it's, yeah. See, the point is, you think of the Apollo moon mission, when Kennedy said we'll go to the moon and get back by 1969, the entire nation was galvanized toward one single goal. So if you set 5 trillion and all of us galvanized to work that way, the income tax department, the ESI department, the land department, if everybody starts working towards that, I think it's definitely attainable.
Okay. Last word, Tim.
For many years, I followed the philosophy of the former Israeli President Shimon Peres, who is quoted as having said that optimists and pessimists die the same, but they live very differently. But lately, I've been following, maybe a little bit too much, the philosophy of the American political pundit George Will, who is a pessimist. And he says he's a pessimist because that way he's rarely disappointed, and every once in a while he's pleasantly surprised.
Okay, thank you very much, my panelists, for your contributions, and thank you very much for your contributions as well.